Hey everybody, welcome back. Wayne here. Today we're going to talk about what happens when there's a failure to recommit after an infidelity. If you've worked with me or if you've heard me talk about it in some of my videos before, I think that there are 4 big tasks that need to happen for every couple as they navigate and walk through infidelity. And that's the first is a full disclosure. And then the second is expressing empathy. The third is forgiveness. And the fourth is co-creating a new relationship. Now, those aren't all linear. I think the first 2 are, but forgiveness and creating a new relationship probably begin as soon as there's a full disclosure. So they're not linear. You're working on all of them at the same time, kind of in the behind the scenes. So when I talk about co-creating a new relationship after infidelity, I'm talking about the future of the marriage. And the concept of recommitting eventually takes center stage in your relationship. And truthfully, if you're both learning to commit to being rigorously honest with yourself and with each other, then you're already working on this future relationship, like I said before. Even if you're not there yet, I'm asking you to be all in, at least for the next 6 months to a year. But be all in for that time and with all that you can be, and see where you are in 6 months to a year. When I start talking about commitment, I think about this story, and you probably have all heard it, of the chicken and the pig trying to decide what they should each bring to this big party that they're going to throw. And the chicken says, well, I'd be happy to bring some eggs to the party. And then he suggests to the pig, why don't you bring some bacon? And the pig says, well, that's not quite fair. For you, it's just a contribution, but for me, it's everything. All metaphors break down somewhere along the way. But I think this fable has a reminder that we need to bring everything into the relationship, not just make a contribution. Before I start, let me make a few disclaimers. First, those of us at A Fair Recovery would never, ever, ever encourage someone to commit to a relationship that's unsafe or unhealthy. And second, the steps that I am talking about today probably take place later in the recovery process, typically 12 to 18 months into the recovery after both parties have shown an ongoing dedication to recovery and are following the process. It's a good idea to read this and get a vision for where you're headed for the future. Third, this particular task of recovery isn't always possible. In order for a marriage to thrive after infidelity, both parties have to put forth effort to achieve life's potential. And recovery and surviving infidelity is a long process with many, many components. Each individual has their personal recovery to manage along with the issues that they have to address to heal their relationship. From the beginning, when I'm working with a couple, I tell them that this process is going to take anywhere from 18 months to 24 months. And for many, quite frankly, it might take even longer. I also tell them that even if they take responsibility for healing both as individuals and as a couple, there's one last barrier I see that happens towards the end of the process. At A Fair Recovery, merely surviving infidelity is not the goal. Our goal is to help people find a new and extraordinary life of meaning and of purpose, and this is a critical step toward that end. Infidelity shatters the vows that we once made and leaves us adrift with no sure direction and often uncertain. Questions arise like, what's the nature of our relationship? What do we want? Do I choose to be with you till death do us part? Or am I going to have nothing to do with you? Are we trying to restore the old marriage, or are we trying to build a new one? And even more, I have to decide whether I can ever fully give myself to you again and afford you the opportunity to hurt me all over again. And to say the least, recommitting is difficult and uncertain. But when the right process is utilized and the right approach is applied, it's so well worth the effort. However, failing to take the final step of recommitting can leave couples stuck for decades, and I have seen that happen. Couples can remain in a position of being emotionally divorced while still living in the sham of a marriage. They settle for something neither of them really wants. And additionally, without the vision of recovery and without a true example, many couples wrongfully assume that the sham of a marriage is all that they can ever really hope for. In Western culture, marriage is based on decisions made by both parties because they choose to share their lives with one another. Vows are made expressing love and the intent to be faithful. And once these vows are broken, we ask ourselves, what is the nature of the relationship? In the beginning stages of recovery, it's really difficult to know. Both parties are confused and hurting and don't know if they can ever trust or feel safe with their spouse again. The betrayed spouse questions whether or not their mate is willing to do the necessary work to prevent this from happening again. And they somehow have to determine whether they matter to their mate or not, and if they can ever feel safe with them again. They will ultimately have to grieve the pain and the little losses and forgive the offenses that have been made. The unfaithful spouse, on the other hand, worries about whether their mate can ever forgive them and move on. And oftentimes they fear that this will be held over their head for the remainder of their life, and whether or not they will ever escape the shadow and the shame of their selfishness. Love is called into question. Feelings for their mate frequently disappear and doubts arise as to whether love could ever return. You can understand why it takes so much time for both parties to feel secure and safe enough in the process to begin considering this recommitment, this co-creation of a new relationship that I talk about. So if your recovery has allowed you to find a respect and appreciation for your mate, but you still feel stuck, you might be struggling because the relationship has never been redefined. Certain questions have to be answered. What are we and who are we? What kind of marriage do you want? And what kind of partner do you need to be in that marriage that you want? And what's getting in your way? Are we happy with just surviving infidelity, or do we want something greater? What I'm asking for you to do is to begin to consider, what are we doing and what are we ready to commit to in our journey together? Are we both willing to put everything we've got in, at least for a year? There are all kinds of barriers, and here are just some tips on overcoming some of those barriers as you recommit. This is not appropriate for every person in the early stages, but you'll see some of this that you need to do pretty quickly. Seek community. Talk with other couples who may be 3 or 4 years down the line in their recovery from infidelity. Find out specifically what worked for them and what didn't work. How did they work through the issues of recommitment? What's been helpful for them? You can find that support on the forums on Affair Recovery easily. Consider whether you're willing to be all in. What do you need to get to that point? What are your barriers during this time? How would you be different if you were to come to that point? And third, explore some symbolisms. This is probably my favorite, and I love some of the creative things that people have done over the years. If you're further down the road, at least a year or two, you might want to consider getting new rings to symbolize the new relationship. You can set up a ritual that puts a mark in the sand, a stake, if you will, that says, this is over. We're going to go a new direction now. You're going to set up new rituals of connection and rituals of cherishing one another. Gottman talks about that a lot. You might consider a ceremony to renew your wedding vows, and even, ways of destroying some of the old evidence if you still have that. Couples do all kinds of creative things, and I think symbolism is so important as we go and navigate through this recommittal phase. A fourth barrier may be the failure to create safety in the relationship. It could be really helpful to demonstrate recommitment through the actions for a safe relationship. And I think a great task would be to have a conversation with the two of you to say, what makes you feel safe in this relationship? And both of you get 2 or 3, 4 things to say, this makes me feel safe. Another one is the unwillingness to forgive or accept forgiveness. Forgiving each other, forgiving yourself, all of that. I think it's also really important to allow the betrayed spouse to be the one that invites the unfaithful spouse back in for a recommitment. It can also be a mutual way of doing that. These are not etched in stone, it's just some guidelines. What I would say over everything is pray and meditate for guidance on this recommitment. One final note, if your mate says no, or they're not ready, do not lose heart. Open up for a discussion and see if they're at least willing to discuss what needs to happen as the two of you move forward. And last but not least, if you are struggling to find community, no matter what stage of recovery you're in, we would love to help you. That's what we're here for. Especially if you're an unfaithful spouse, please consider signing up for the Hope for Healing course to find guidance and expert help in a community to help you through your recovery. And of course, we'd love for you to continue to utilize the Affair Recovery community right here in the free resources of the Affair Recovery Library. So once again, thank you so much for joining me and giving me your time. I'll be back again next week. And in the meantime, know that we're here to support you. Feel free to write in and leave comments, support one another, and let us know how we can best support you guys. Thanks so much, and we wish you all the best.